Hello, welcome everyone. Really great to have you here. Another online event, and I know people are starting to get out there, be in person. Looking forward to seeing everyone or many of you sooner than later. My name is Vicente Sederberg. I'm one of the founding partners here at Vicente Sederberg, and just really excited to put this webinar on and to hear from two really amazing people, Kim Napoli and Mark Ross. And I just wanted to quickly introduce them and give a little bit of background on our Impact and ESG practice that is newly formed with the addition of Mark and Kim. It's a really exciting time in cannabis, as many of you know. Something I've been focusing on both with the firm but also nationally is just continuing to beat the drum of everyone in this industry, whether they like it or not, has an activist component to what they do. So you're all activists, and really what we're trying to accomplish here as an industry is set a good tone, if not the tone, on what it means to be a good corporate citizen. So really excited about this practice, really excited to have Mark and Kim on board. Mark's been a friend for years. And has really done some amazing work in the industry and also outside the industry before that. Kim has been with our firm in the past as both a clerk and an attorney. She went off and did some really amazing things in Massachusetts, the Northeast, and in the cannabis industry altogether, but really excited to have her back on the Vicente Sederberg team, and couldn't be happier to turn it over to them to help run this Impact and ESG webinar here. So thanks so much, guys, and thanks everyone for being here.
Thanks, Christian. Really appreciate the introduction and the vision for this new practice area. It's really exciting. I'm Mark Ross, and next to me is Kim Napoli. So I'm just going to talk a little bit, just a minute, about my background so you have a better idea about who I am. As I said, I'm Mark Ross. I've been an environmental attorney in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors for approximately 30 years. Most recently, prior to this position, as head of Impact and ESG at Vicente Sederberg, I was the director of community outreach for Harvest Health and Recreation, the multi-state operator out of Tempe, Arizona. Really, that role morphed into more of a corporate social responsibility role than just community outreach, which was my intent. Prior to that, I had founded and ran a national environmental advocacy nonprofit that worked with the music industry. And prior to that, I had a more traditional environmental legal career, in-house environmental counsel to Alcoa, and working for a large law firm and a governmental agency. I have been actively involved in the cannabis industry for 5 years as a professional. I serve as the corporate social responsibility mentor to Canopy Boulder. I've been working for the last 4 years, almost 5 years now, on the City of Denver's Cannabis Sustainability Working Group, and also have been on the advisory board of the Cannabis Voter Project. And that is me. Kim, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone, and thanks to Christian and Mark for the brief introduction, and also thank you all for coming today. I'm Kim Napoli. I am presently the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Vicente Sederberg, which I've had the pleasure of working with in the past. First, when I was in law school, I was the Boston office's first legal intern. It was also my first legal internship. I'm just going to go backwards here. I come to cannabis by way of hemp from opening a hemp store in Harvard Square, Cambridge, Massachusetts, called The Hempist. And that was in 2006. Since then, I became the director of outreach for the campaign to legalize in Massachusetts. We were ultimately successful. I then was appointed to the Cannabis Advisory Board by Governor Baker to serve as his expert in minority business development, and had the opportunity to help stand up Massachusetts industry and work with the commissioners and operators to create a socially equitable industry. And we're still working on that. Talk more about that later. I was the director of diversity programs for New England Treatment Access. Following that, I was the director of corporate social responsibility for Parallel, the multi-state operator. I have a Bachelor of Science and my JD from Suffolk University, so I'm a double Rammy, and I'm barred in Massachusetts as well. And I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you guys about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Kim, thanks. I guess I'm a double Penn State-y now that Penn State bought Dickinson Law. So double. Anyway, I like to start with this slide. Even though this webinar is really ostensibly about environmental, social, and governance and diversity, equity, and inclusion, let's go back 10 years, because before people were really talking about measuring ESG, people were talking generally about corporate citizenship, around corporate social responsibility. And so I like to show this Venn diagram because this is a programmatic view of what corporate social responsibility is. It's really the cross-section of sustainability, community engagement, employee engagement, and philanthropy. Now, obviously, there are things missing from this. Diversity, equity, and inclusion spans between community and employee engagement. And environmental compliance is part of sustainability. And so, but I like to start here because it's a good place just to get an idea of some of the issues that pop up. I also like to start here. It's pretty well known. I think we've got a hot mic somewhere. That's better. So I also like to start here because people often ask, what are the financial benefits of engaging in corporate social responsibility? Isn't that something that people just, it's a nice to have, it's for the Patagonias and the Ben and Jerry's of the world, but it's not really true because there are some significant bottom line benefits to having a very thoughtful corporate social responsibility program. When I say thoughtful, I really mean one that is strategic, one that's integrated throughout the company, and most importantly, one that's authentic. And so this slide just demonstrates some of the benefits: winning new business, enhanced relationships with stakeholders, attracting, maintaining a happy workforce, positive media, enhancing your influence in the industry, differentiating yourself from your competition, attracting talent, retaining talent, increasing customer retention, saving money on energy and operating costs. These are just some of the benefits of what happens when you have a good corporate social responsibility program.
And I'll just jump in and add that all of those things, they sound really nice. They're things we all want if we're business operators, but the reality is they all affect the bottom line. Which ultimately, that's the success of your business. So if you really want to think about and achieve success, you need to think all around the spectrum of the benefits of CSR and consider all of them in ways that you can bring them into your business. And we're happy to help do that. That's what this conversation is about today.
Thanks, Kim. That's a good point to be made. Now, drilling down into ESG is more, where CSR is more programmatic. ESG is really analytical, and what's been driving ESG? We'll talk about some of the drivers in a few slides coming up. But just starting at the basics, what is ESG? I get asked this question all the time. So environmental, and this is not a comprehensive list of what ESG is, and it may not all pertain to your company, depending on what your company does. But environment is everything from climate change to greenhouse gas emissions to carbon footprinting to resource depletion, nature conservation, waste and pollution, deforestation. It's a whole host of environmental issues. Social is everything from working conditions, including your labor conditions, local communities and indigenous communities, and philanthropy, conflict resolution with those communities, health and safety for your employees and the communities around you, employee relations, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Basically, your social impact. And then governance are more formalized structures that you have inside your company. So it's everything from your board diversity and makeup to pay equity, to your tax strategy, to political lobbying and where you make your donations, because who you give money to says a lot about what your company stands for. Bribery and corruption policies, your supply chain policies, executive pay. Are you paying your executives 200 times what you're paying your lowest paid employee? That also says a lot about your company. So ESG is really the measurement of all of these different aspects, and then ideally benchmarking them and reporting them, which is going to become increasingly required, as we will talk about. Now, why CSR ESG? This is an important slide because a lot of what is driving ESG right now are investors. I apologize for that. My computer is updating. Hopefully we won't go offline. But it keeps telling me it wants to update.
You're good.
Okay, so better valuations for companies that engage in ESG. And here are some charts that just demonstrate that companies, the top ESG reporters and the companies that are measuring perform better in the S&P 500 that are known as ESG companies. You also will find right now in corporate valuations, you can see over time from 1975 to 2020 that intangibles are making up a greater degree of a company's valuation. 90% in 2020, 90% of a company's valuation are intangibles, not the financials, the intangibles, of which ESG are large factors in those intangibles. And then, of course, the chart to the left from PwC about poor ESG performance has led to material discounting of companies, and that people are prepared to pay a premium on companies that have strong ESG performance. So the financial incentives are there, but there's other reasons why environmental, social, and governance reporting is going to be coming to the forefront of not just the cannabis industry, but all industries. Good, Kim, you want to take it away on DEI?
Sure, absolutely. So what is DEI? And you can't have made it this far into 2021 and not have heard something about diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly following last year and the race riots and all that we had to bear witness to. This is at the forefront of our culture right now. We're really having a watershed moment in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusivity. So it's something that we all hear about, but what does it mean? So when we talk about diversity, and you can read on the slide, diversity is defined as the collective mixture of differences and similarities, and that includes individual and organizational characteristics, values, beliefs, experiences, backgrounds, preferences, and behaviors. So everything that makes us us, really. Where do we come from? Why do we come from there? Why do we arrive at the conclusions and conclusions that we arrive at? Those are all informed by the experiences we have and everything else in that first column on the left there. When we talk about equity, then we refer to fair treatment and access in opportunity and advancement. So that's access, opportunity, and advancement for all individuals. But I want to clarify that's for everyone. It's not just a select group that is identified for X reason. It actually means everyone is arriving at or has the tools to get to where they need to go. The tools that they are actually, they're going to benefit them and help them along the way so that we can all get to the party together. Work to promote equity includes identifying and eliminating barriers to fair treatment for disadvantaged groups. So again, leveling the playing field, making it so that everyone has equal access and equal opportunity. When we talk about inclusion, the final column on the right, inclusion describes the extent to which a person feels welcomed, supported, respected, and valued. So identifying that and talking about that requires us to ensure that everyone has a seat at the table so that the voice is heard and their opinions are considered and that their value is evident to them. And I mean, again, this applies to everyone. I think everyone can think back to a time where they did not feel valued. They didn't feel respected. They didn't feel that their voice was heard or that their opinion was considered. And it's not ever a good feeling. And if that is something that is present in your workforce, you want to find out, address it, or prevent it from happening by having diversity plans and other instruments of insurance so that you can make sure that you have a workplace that is truly diverse, equitable, and inclusive. Oh, you skipped a slide.
I went up too far. Okay, so we talked a little bit about investors and the pressure by investors to start to, for companies to start to measure and benchmark and report their ESG metrics. But this is really a perfect storm right now in the cannabis industry, more so than a lot of other industries. Not only do we have investors that are want to jump into the cannabis industry and are looking for companies that measure ESG, because frankly, those companies are better run, and as we've seen, they produce better results. But we also have a mostly millennial workforce in the cannabis industry, and according to the latest research and surveying, a mostly millennial customer base, followed very closely by Generation Y or Generation Z. And so those folks, millennials and Gen Zers, all feel very passionately about, one, working for companies that provide social impact or are sustainable, but they also care about shopping with companies that are having social impact and are sustainable. And so you've got those stakeholders also driving this development in ESG. And then, of course, we've got governmental entities starting to push for the required measurement and reporting of ESG metrics. So in the EU, we now have the EU non-financial reporting directive, along with the EU Parliament's disclosure regulation, which is required starting this past March for publicly traded companies in the EU, and soon to be private companies as well, to report climate impacts, whether they're contributing to climate change, companies are, or maybe impacted by climate change. Really focusing a lot on carbon and climate, though those same directives and regulations are going to start to require in 2022 more broader reporting around ESG metrics. In the US here, just in June, last month, June 16th, the House of Representatives passed the Corporate Governance Improvement and Investor Protection Act, also known as HR 1187, which established rules, or its intent is to establish rules requiring public companies to disclose certain ESG metrics, including metrics related to climate, board diversity, employee management, and welfare practices. There was a request for public comments on climate change disclosures. Public comment period is closed, but they received over 400 comments, ranging from suggestions by some businesses that ESG and climate disclosures be made private, but subject to Exchange Act enforcement for companies that don't necessarily thoroughly disclose impact with regard to climate or falsify information. And then investor organizations and other public organizations and companies have also suggested in those comments that there be public disclosure with a private right of action against those disclosures under Section 18 of the Securities Exchange Act. And so there's going to be potential enforcement, whether from the regulatory body, from the SEC, or from the public. Of course, shareholder proxies are also on the table for people that own shares in a company to get together and challenge a company that isn't advancing or reporting enough with regard to their environmental, social, and governance practices. And then finally, there's the SEC Climate and ESG Task Force, which is intending to step up enforcement around climate disclosure. So you've got these four stakeholder organizations: investors, employees, customers, and governmental entities, really starting to push for greater ESG disclosures, and it's coming. Now, the big question: how to get started on ESG, and we'll hit high-level points here, and then we'll dig deeper into it over the next several slides. The first thing that you want to do, and I could do an entire webinar, we could do an entire webinar on materiality, is you want to identify the most material aspects of your operation and the stakeholders, your pain points and priorities. So you want to basically take a look at your entire operation and figure out who are the stakeholders that could greatly impact the way you do business. So if you're located in a rural area, maybe it's not so much your neighbors. If you're located in an urban area, maybe it's your community. If you have a large workforce, maybe it's your employees that could most directly, materially impact your company. Are you highly intensive in terms of manufacturing or cultivation, and are environmental issues more pressing? Or are you retail? You need to determine what that group of material stakeholders and issues are for your company. And you can do that by developing a team, an internal team with representatives from across your organization, operations, finance, legal, HR, compliance, marketing. Every single group inside your organization is going to be sensitive to particular stakeholders, and that can help you better define what your material issues are and your material stakeholders are that can impact your business. So that way you can at least put some guardrails or narrow your focus as you start to measure your ESG impact. And then, of course, you want to measure. That is the first place you need to start. So right after you figure out what your material issues are and your material stakeholders. And Kim, you want to talk a bit about where you start with diversity?
Sure. So the reasons for diversity is what I'm going to talk about here. And then the following slide, I'll talk about how you go about, or the reasons for going about doing that and how you should get started. Well, the why behind diversity, the slide says diversify for diversity, which Mark loves in alliteration. But to going a little bit deeper in that, the reasons behind that are it's profitability goes up for companies that are diverse and inclusive and have female representation. They are profitability, again, that's your bottom line. That's the goal here, right? You may have goals, rightfully so, to do well for your community, but certainly businesses that are more profitable are more able to do well for the community. So that being a goal, profitability is something that is informed by your diversity score. Additionally, the buying power among diverse buyers, and that Native American, African American, is going up exponentially. So you want to be able to represent the communities that you want to be purchasing from you. Major reason for being diversified within your workforce. Additionally, the local population is just by leaps and bounds becoming more diverse. So not wanting to be on an island and being an employee that does not represent, again, the communities that it's in, either by way of who your contracts are with, but also for your workforce. You want to make sure that you're reflective of that and have a good base of employees that are the best talent out there, men, women, LGBTQI, et cetera. There's a lot of options for achieving diversity goals. We'll talk about that in a second, but really and truly, the bottom line is affected, and that's why you want to be as diverse as possible. And then jumping into the next piece is reporting. This is how you begin to understand what it is that you're doing in terms of diversity, how you're doing, and why you're doing it. So KPI is the key performance indicator, and it's a quantifiable measure of performance over time for specific goals. So again, we're going to talk about this in an upcoming slide, but each independent operator is going to have different goals that they are going towards for diversity and inclusivity. Maybe, you know, you're in a predominantly Black community and you have an operation that is mostly male, and you need to look at what are we missing? Why is it all males? See the word here. Why is it all Black males? Is it because we're in a neighborhood that is all Black? What are the reasons behind that, and how can we change that? Once you identify where your deficits are, you can then begin to make progress towards those goals. And those key performance indicators are what you're going to use to indicate your success to buyers, to investors, et cetera. So it's something, and also to your workforce, it matters to them too, who's around them. So these are the ways in which you will be able to discuss and make progress in your goals and make those goals happen.
Right. And the only thing I would add to that with regard to KPIs is OKRs is another system that a lot of companies like to use now that's been emerging. Objectives and key results. Same concept though. Once you figure out where your pain points are through materiality, once you start to measure where you are and benchmark it, then you can start to develop your KPIs and your OKRs to set where you're going. Basically, create your map for continuous improvement. So getting started. These are just some issues. Again, won't apply to every single company, depending on what kind of operation you have. But these are areas where you can start to look. Water, energy with regard to sustainability. Water, energy usage, waste, chemical usage, supply chain, of course, your packaging, green buildings. If you're building from the ground up or you're renovating a facility, you may want to take a look at lighting, HVAC, renewable energy, windows, insulation, the whole package of what goes into green building. And then, of course, environmental justice and health equity are important issues, especially for the cannabis industry. A good example here in Denver, Colorado, and understanding that this is a national or international audience right now. In Colorado, when we started issuing licenses for cultivation, the vast majority of them were issued up in North Denver, which were communities of color. So now you've got communities of color disproportionately impacted by cultivation operations, everything from emissions to auto traffic, cars, truck hauling, you name it, construction, and that in turn can lead to some health equity issues as well, based on the emissions and chemical usage and whatnot in the community. So all things to keep in mind when you talk about sustainability.
Absolutely.
Community engagement, how to get started. Again, these are just some suggestions of things that you can start looking at when building out a community engagement program. Everything from strategic philanthropy and collaborative projects in the community to preferred community hiring practices, community events, use of facilities and tours. Here in the cannabis industry, depending on what your state allows or doesn't allow, when you are new in cannabis in a community, there is a stigma attached to your business, period, hands down, just from the unmitigated war on drugs over 50 years. And people don't know what actually takes place in your cultivation or even in your retail store. Sometimes you need to have frosted windows and people can't come in, and they have these misperceptions, the community does. So being able, if you can, I know in some states you cannot, offering tours of your facilities, I think that helps. And then skills training and education, getting your folks out into the community or working with other community organizations to provide skills training and education around this new and exciting industry where we want more people and more talent to come into the industry. Employee engagement. Again, we have a mostly millennial workforce. Study after study, if you just Google CSR benefits in millennials, you'll find that this workforce wants to do more than just produce a product and show up at work. So everything from benefits and having a robust menu of benefits for your employees, volunteer opportunities in the community, philanthropy, whether it's an employee match to donations or giving your employees money to give to nonprofits of their choice that they volunteer with, feedback teams with regard to the review process, not having just a top-down process, but having one that's maybe a 360-degree review process. Employee ownership in companies where states will allow it is very, very positive in keeping employees and attracting talent. Employee appreciation and awards. Nothing says that you appreciate an employee more than having awards and giving even just tokens of financial incentives or days off or time off for employee engagement and for going above and beyond. And then, of course, community engagement opportunities. As I said, employees want to do more than just show up at an office or at a location.
Can I jump in on that last slide real quick?
Sure.
Just wanted to add that this is something that's relevant in all workforces, in all industries, but particularly in the cannabis industry, given the origins of the industry. Where did it come from? And it being an illicit market or traditional market that has been around for hundreds of years. And in this country, it's been very, very strong. So there is a culture that exists. And a lot of these folks come to, if you're a cannabis employer, they come to your company thinking it's their dream job because they love cannabis. And now here they get to work in a regulated industry and sell the product that they love using themselves. That's, helped their grandmother when she had cancer or, so it's something that means a lot to the employees here. And it really means a lot to your employees if they see you, one, that you understand this reality, and two, that you respect it. And respect obviously means different things to different people, but to start taking steps towards that, understanding what it means to your employees by way of, as Mark said, surveys is a great way to figure that out, but you really want to pay attention to that. I think it's more trouble than it's worth to ignore it. But you're in it, you're coming into this industry. It's cannabis, it's been around longer than we have, so let's respect it and get to know your employees on that level. I think that's a great place to start.
No, those are excellent points, Kim, excellent points. Hey, I see we're getting some questions into the feed. We are going to have a Q&A at the end of this, so by all means, please, if you have questions, please put them into the chat and we will get to them in a few minutes. Kim, back to you.
Sure. So getting started on DEI, we briefly mentioned this before. Just in general, the way that you're going to get started is these simple steps right here. You're going to ask questions. You're going to set specific goals. You're going to identify a senior level champion. You're going to hold yourself accountable, and creating a task force is an optional way, but that really does help. Excuse me. I have a 3-year-old and he's here. That is a great way to start and hold yourself accountable and maintain what you've begun. 1 second. So companies, I found in my experiences, companies that recognize that they're only as good as the people that they work. Excuse me, just 1 second.
So,
sorry, I'm right here. I'm here.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that.
There you go.
As I was saying, companies that
Kim, your volume went out.
I'm back. Sorry about that. So companies that recognize that they're only as good as the people and other companies that they work with, they're going to commit a significant amount of time and resources to finding the best of those companies. Really, truly the best of the best. It's not going to make a difference what the person looks like, but they're going to cast a very wide net that enables and ensures that they're going to find a diverse array of people who are the best of the best. By taking that time to make that and making that effort to build and maintain a diverse workforce and supply chain, companies, again, have that larger access, and in turn, they improve their odds of finding the best people. When you put people first, regardless of race or religion or gender or age or physical disability or sexual orientation, companies who do that, they have an advantage over other companies because they have more opportunities. It's important to note that DEI is not, by no means is it a one size fits all. And I think that's people, often we get pigeonholed in thinking that it's black versus white, male versus female, gay versus straight, and it's so much more than that. And it's actually kind of fun once you start thinking about ways that you can increase your diversity. It's fun to make strides towards that. It takes you out of your day-to-day stuck in your Outlook or worrying about numbers, and you get to think a little bit more worldly and about the people around you and who they are and why they are the way they are, and you get to share that about yourself. If you're trying to get started in DEI and you're thinking about those questions about who do I work with, who works with me, if I have a cultivation, is your cultivation males only? And are the employees in one location more ethnically diverse than another? Those are questions you're going to start asking. And the answers to those questions are going to point you towards one or a few goals. And the goals will then be further informed by your company's overall strategic goals. Again, are you a cultivation? Are you trying to, do you have a philanthropic end? Are you trying to benefit a community that you've identified that needs assistance because of war on drugs or other high rates of incarceration or arrest? Once you identify all of those things taken together, you can then create an action plan that defines an initiative, again, a person who's going to be responsible, that senior level champion, what the specific actions you're going to take, and then the time frame to complete those actions. So all of this becomes very detailed, and it's a written plan, and it's something that you then hold yourselves accountable to. You do what we discussed earlier. You measure, you create benchmarks, you measure, you have KPIs, and that's when you will be able to start to see the value added to your organization. And not only to your organization, but the community. We can talk about this in as narrow as one employer, but we can also talk about it in terms of the country and the world overall. It's a very broad subject. There's a lot of ways to impact diversity. Employers generally think workforce and the supply chain, but there's so much more than that. And I think if, as I mentioned before, if you're trying to really get your arms around this, it's best when you're going to have at least one person who's responsible, but really creating a task force is something that can help you ensure an ongoing commitment to your initiatives and help you create more robust on-point initiatives that help drive the success of your company. You'll get a bunch of people from across your organization who are as passionate about it, but don't necessarily have a DEI background. Maybe you get Jim from accounting and Sally from cultivation and, a couple of folks together who are just passionate about the issue. And you're going to get a great cross-section of people who are going to put their ideas together and come up with some really great stuff for your company. And you're going to be happy because you held yourself accountable and now you're more profitable.
Right. Kim, those are all excellent points. I was going to say studies have been shown that, again, companies that do have strong DEI programs also perform better because there's a diversity of opinion as well as people, diversity of ideas, because coming from different people from different backgrounds, and it just makes for a stronger organization. So that's excellent, Kim.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to touch on, because it does touch on the area of ESG, and there's some confusion around B Corps, benefit corporations. So some of you may have heard about B Corps. Basically, they measure their success using a triple bottom line: profits, people, and planet. B Corp is a third-party certification by a nonprofit organization called B Lab, and basically it's a free assessment that you can go on online and take. That, and the next slide goes into the different areas of what the B Corp assessment includes. But you can go in and see how you're performing. It's a good place to start to see where you are in terms of your ESG journey and where you could make improvements. Benefit corporations is a legal structure recognized, I think it's now 37 states, as well as a number of countries, which is, instead of being an S Corp or a C Corp or an LLC or an LLP, you can be a benefit corp. Sometimes they're called, in California, they're called different things, social impact organizations and public benefit corporations, but it's still the same. It's a different legal structure that you can place yourself in. It also insulates you from investors that may challenge how you're spending money. If you're spending money on community outreach or other environmental, social, and governance initiatives, that some investors, I would say ignorant, some would say conservative, may say that doesn't go to your bottom line. You can point to being a benefit corporation in your legal structure and say, well, we measure things a little differently around here. We measure things not just on the financials, but also on the impact that we have. So, and this is the B Corp model. Basically, if you're going through the B Corp assessment, it hits these 5 general areas, buckets, that cover everything from, again, the whole wide array of ESG, and then some that people probably aren't even thinking about. So I just wanted to throw that up there for you to take a look at. And then, so we hear, again, this is a brand new practice for Vicente Sederberg, being led by Christian Sederberg, who was on earlier, and Kim and myself. Some of the things that we are able to do in terms of services are what's listed here: ESG screening, identification of gaps, risks, and opportunities, diversity, equity, inclusion, internal and external policies, diversity, equity, and inclusion, supply chain, vendors, recruitment, employment policies, corporate social responsibility consulting. So helping your organization find what build your foundation, your mission, your vision, your values, what's your central tenets around community engagement, employee engagement, strategic philanthropy plans, helping out with community engagement plans, positive impact plans, social impact plans. Here in the city of Denver, there's a new social impact plan requirement for all licensees. If you are located here in the city of Denver, we're going to have another webinar just focused on that with the city on the 21st. And you can check the VS website for that information. Benefit corporation establishment and certification through the B Corp process. We can help you walk through that if you want to take your ESG practices to the next level. Corporate nonprofit organization, foundation establishment, all this kind of impact in environmental, social, and governance, employee engagement surveying and plans. And Kim, you want to?
Yeah, the last 2 years, so ongoing CSR, ESG, DEI operations consulting. Now, when I spoke about having a task force, this is something that you would use us for. Have someone who's an expert in the field, who is an outside source, who's objective, and who can help you identify all of the above, but also continue to help you develop your initiatives and ensure that you're meeting your goals and figure out ways to advance them. Sustainability consulting and environmental compliance. This is something that in a number of states is currently required under the regulations. At our firm, we have vast, wide array of experience in this, but also folks that aren't required to, it's still something you should think about doing because you're a citizen of this world. And this is something that, again, we can help you to develop as well over time. It starts small, but it ends up being really impactful and really big. And I think that getting the help that you need from the outset is a great way to trim the fat and get right to the heart of it. We can help you.
I think we're going to have to do another webinar on environmental compliance alone. We actually at Vicente Sederberg have 3 attorneys with an environmental compliance agency background, including myself. And this is becoming an emerging issue. Not only is ESG becoming an emerging issue from an investor standpoint and an SEC standpoint and a millennial-driven values standpoint, but environmental compliance is starting to pop. I don't know of a single cannabis company, at least in the States, that has an environmental manager on staff that is well-versed in Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, FIFRA, RECRA, CERCLA, all the different alphabet soup of environmental regulation. And meanwhile, we just saw in the last month alone, heavy fines against Wellgreens, a California company, for improper disposal of hazardous waste, ethanol, $45,000. Sierra Naturals in Massachusetts for lacking an air permit for volatile organic compound emissions and flushing ethanol waste down the drain without a pretreatment permit or notifying the publicly owned treatment works, another $18,000 violation there. And then a landowner in Calaveras was just ordered by a court to pay $680,000 for environmental violations that took place on their property, despite them not being involved in the cannabis operation. So environmental compliance, it's coming, and it's something else that we can help you with, that we have an expertise inside.
And the reason it's significant, the fines are obviously hefty. Those are fines that bite. They've got teeth, they bite. But that's going to tend towards bring us into the health equity, the environmental justice we discussed. Where are these things being dumped? Who's being impacted? I mean, you hear about forever chemicals in rivers that's legal. It's totally fine. And then you hear about kids getting leukemia and swaths, neighborhoods falling ill from horrible things that never should have happened. And those are harms that continue years after that environmental compliance occurred, or the lack of compliance rather occurred. So these are not just harms that hit your wallet up front. They're harms that hit everyone for years to come. And truly, again, if you're a citizen of the world, we all are. These are things that you should be concerned with, particularly in the cannabis industry, as what we're dealing with is a plant. We should be thinking about the environment.
Yeah, and of course, there's also the possibility of going to jail for criminal violations for intentionally dumping without a license or a permit. It's happened in every other industry that I know of. It's coming to the cannabis industry, and the cannabis industry, as far as I can see at this point, is not prepared for that. We have about 15 minutes left. We have time for questions. It looks like the first question, are the ESG disclosures going to be required of only U.S. companies or those who sell product in the U.S.? Right now, the ESG disclosure requirements are required in Europe for publicly traded companies. The Canadian government and the provinces, as well as the US government, are talking about requiring it for publicly traded companies. That said, if you are a privately held company and want to get bought by a publicly traded company, or you're looking for an exit strategy, or you're looking for investment dollars, it would be wise to start to measure your ESG metrics and be able to report on them, because people are going to ask about them. So it's not just U.S. companies, it's not just publicly traded companies, it's all companies. Mm-hmm. Another question, this is for you, Kim. We see larger corporations starting to address DEI. Can we get your thoughts on how this impacts small firms where resources are already limited?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So we often take our tips and our starting points from larger firms. What is Apple doing? What is Microsoft doing? They have a lot of money. Let's mirror that. And a lot of the times, it's not the right thing. I mean, it's great that they're making efforts, but again, those efforts they're making are goals that are informed by where their deficits are and what their company's overall strategy is. So for smaller firms, you're going to identify exactly or follow the same steps, and you're going to do something that fits your company. Again, it's not a one size fits all. So it truly matters what matters to you, what matters to your workforce, who your workforce is, what your company goals are. And then you can take stride. Maybe it's just having conversations with your employees. Maybe it's creating spaces, employee resource groups, small things that don't cost any money. They take resource, maybe it's time, but you're not looking at a financial expenditure, but you will be looking at a financial gain when your employees have much better morale and are producing better and you're more profitable overall. So again, this is something we can talk a lot more about. If you want to contact me, my email will be listed here. But that's a great question, and it's something that I'd love to help you think through.
Excellent points, Kim. Excellent points. Next question. Do you believe that HR 1187 will pass the Senate this year? And if so, when will ESG requirements be defined and required for disclosure? Well, that's an excellent question for looking into the tea leaves of what the Senate will do. I'm not sure the Senate's going to do much, honestly, as we have seen from a 50-50 Senate. And these types of issues around ESG and stakeholder capitalism have been politicized. Despite the fact that some of the largest corporations in the world subscribe to ESG reporting, and I think 90 of the top of the Fortune 100 have sustainability reports already. So I don't know if it's going to pass the Senate, but I think we can look in terms of guidance of what will be required. Europe is always ahead of the States when it comes to issues like this, and you can take a look at what's going on in Europe right now with regard to their requirements around ESG reporting and measurement. You can also take a look at what's going on in some of the committees as they start to discuss these issues in the comment letters. There's 400-page comment letters or 400 comment letters that came in to the SEC regarding the reporting of ESG. It remains to be seen. I think it's going to start, though, with climate and carbon footprint. Companies that are either carbon intensive or companies that are located in an area where climate could impact them. So, for example, water withdrawals, let's just say cultivation facilities in Arizona and New Mexico, the southwestern United States, where water is, increasingly impacted by climate change, or companies that use fossil fuels, extraction facilities using fossil fuels. Obviously, energy usage is a huge issue for those that have indoor warehouse grows. So I think you're going to start to see reporting around climate first, or are you located in an area, say Florida or Louisiana, where you could be impacted by climate, your operations directly, and you're going to want to report that so investors know. This is all about, from the SEC standpoint, this is all about letting the investors know what risks are out there with regard to potential investment and letting the consumer know. Next question, is B Corp certification available for medical and recreational cannabis companies? I read on their site that they are not certifying recreational cannabis companies. That is true at this point. I don't know if that's true for the Canadian LPs, but it is true for U.S. companies in the recreational market or the adult use market, that you cannot become a B Corp. Now, a few things there. One, doesn't stop you from taking the B Corp assessment, which is a free tool available on their website, so you can start to score yourself against similar companies, if you would like, non-cannabis companies, consumer packaged goods, retail, agriculture, manufacturing. So you can take the B Corp assessment. Number two, we are in active conversations with B Lab about this, what we would say draconian policy that they have, since cannabis is all but legal in 13 states. Or it's legal in all but 13 States in some way, shape, or form. But there are large players out there on the hemp side that are now B Corps, like Charlotte's Web. And the writing is really on the wall about decriminalization and legalization in this country. And we hope that B Corp and B Lab will evolve on the issue. Next question. Would it be more beneficial for an MSO to form an independent DEI advisory board versus an internal task force? Kim.
So I'm going to presume you mean independent as in third party, some entity not affiliated with the company. I think it's the best blend would be a little bit of both. I think you need the internal task force because who knows your company better than the folks that work there. And when you're creating a task force, thank you for your clarity. Yeah. So when you're creating a task force, I think it's best to get a swath of individuals from across the company. That's all levels. So you want to have, your rank and file, maybe it's retail, all the way up to the executive team, members from across the company of all shapes and sizes. And I think that is a great way to get informed about what's really happening at your company and how do folks really feel and what's missing. And then you take what they've learned and then you can give it to a third party company to do your assessments for you. And that way you're getting the benefit of a third party is that you're not biased towards yourself. There's certainly opportunities, and like the Cannabis Trade Federation has a scorecard for that. That's something that you could easily sign up with, and we could talk to you more about that too. But that is another way of being held accountable. So it's not you holding yourselves accountable to yourselves, it's you being accountable to someone else. And that absolutely is helpful. So again, I'll step back and just say, I think a blend of both is the best, but really it'll be informed by what your company needs and where your deficits are. There's another question here. I'm just going to read it. Are the costs of a DEI advisor deductible to a cannabis-based business, or would those be disallowed deductions under 280E? I'm not an expert in 280E, so I can't answer this question. Mark, do you want to take a stab at this?
I am an environmental attorney, not a tax attorney.
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny. Lawyers are kind of like doctors. You wouldn't go to a heart surgeon and ask for brain surgery. So,
Yes.
Generally, obviously, what's deductible under 280E is cost of goods sold.
Right.
Whether or not, I think it depends on your corporate structure and how you're set up, and who you're doing the DEI work for. And what kind of DEI work you're doing. Are you trying to create a greater workforce in your cultivation facility? Is that directly related to cost of goods sold? One maybe could argue yes, but again, I am not a tax attorney, and I did not stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, so I would not venture a yes right now.
That would be a question for our corporate team, and we can certainly forward that. If you want to email us that question, we can absolutely help find an answer for you.
It's a great solution. So unless there's anything else, again, our contact information is up on the screen. We appreciate you taking an hour of your time out today to hear more about this new exciting practice and a little bit more about the basics around ESG and how to get started. We're going to make this a regular series. I think we'll probably have another webinar. We have one on the 21st, again, if you are Denver oriented, around the new social impact plans. It is quite a change for the city of Denver to require these annual social impact plans and reporting requirements. So I would encourage you to attend that on the 21st. And then starting in September, we're going to have regular impact and ESG, DEI, corporate responsibility webinars as well. So please sign up for those. Thanks very much for your time, Kim. Thank you. Christian, thank you. And we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.